is will Chipper ever return like he said he would?
Hey, Chipper is, listen, all of these games are haunted by different spirits, right?
Right.
But the real spirit haunting this whole franchise is Chipper. Chipper is haunting this whole franchise.
Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. is the name of a game that Scott Cawthon, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, released in 2013, in which everyone loved it, it got its own franchise, and even had its own feature film. Well, I bet Chipper wished so. No, unfortunately, Chipper & Sons never took off like Scott Cawthon's other series, you might have heard of it, being relegated by most as the scary-looking children's mobile game that inspired the popular horror franchise. With Scott even going on record to say that reviewers online said the main character genuinely looked like a scary animatronic. I mean, sure, its presentation can be creepy at times, many agree with that.
Ghastly faces twisted in a grimacing mockery of joy.
But come on the surface it's just a lighthearted kids game about a family-owned lumber company. On the surface, you see, for those who've played it, Chipper & Sons is actually a lot creepier than you'd probably think. And inside this fairly addicting children's mobile game are lots of outright strange story details and a bunch of surprisingly disturbing imagery. So what better way to celebrate Freddy Fazbear's 10th anniversary than to look back at all the really weird content inside of the series' predecessor. Gameplay-wise, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company all revolves around a family-run lumber business, where you play as Tyke, being the owner's son. The owner himself, referred to as Mr. Chipper, gives Tyke blueprints, land, and helps turn wood into lumber for him, also every now and then throwing a date your way. However, as you progress through the game, you learn more and more sinister things about your character's father. One of the very first things that Chipper makes very clear to Tyke is how great his hatred of termites is. I mean, makes sense for the most part. Termites eat wood and beavers use it to build homes, yada yada. However, it's a lot more deep-rooted than that for good old Chipper. Before I go on, it's also best if I introduce you to the Termite King. Simply acting as a helping hand to Tyke on his adventure, it's mentioned that both him and Chipper have had a long rivalry with one another. While it's unclear if this is a type of joke from Chipper, that happens quite often, his hatred seems to stem from a war set in 19 Beaver D3. After this, the feud between termite and beaver kind was supposedly thrown into complete chaos. There's one time where Chipper mentions when he thought that the termite army had taken his arm while he was asleep, where he then rained his vengeance upon them like fire. Which, whoops, seems like his arm had just fallen asleep. Never mind the lost lives or anything. Chipper and the Termite King also both recall the time when the termites delivered a giant Trojan horse to Chipper's home, in an attempt to, well, chew a bit of it down. In turn, Chipper decided to do what he does best, setting fire to all their mouths. I mean, the Termite King literally describes Tyke's father as a beaver with bloodlust, night sweats, and murderous tendencies. This Chipper guy, right? Such a kidder. And potentially a war criminal. Termite King's dialogue also reveals a few things about him, involving Chipper disguising himself as a termite, something he weirdly seems obsessed with, and setting fire, shooting saw blades, and dropping bombs in their termite mounds. Sometimes for basically no reason. This plays into Termite King as a character, as he sees Chipper's attempts of exterminating termite kind in a more playful manner, with many of their mostly harmless pranks on Chipper resulting in even more dead termites. Which just makes this war seem so much more one-sided. Again, if there really even is one. But besides all the bloodshed, this is simply just scratching the surface with Chipper. Throughout the game, we also get little bits and pieces, literally, of slight mentions of Tyke's mom. It's mostly explained that she died somehow and also bakes pies. Well, later on, Chipper explains that not only has she been literally stuffed and placed in a corner of the house, but her death was wildly disturbing. As Chipper puts it, supposedly she, while baking a ginormous pie, fell right in, with him only noticing so after swallowing a spoonful of fur. That's right, Chipper ate his wife, and also thought it was quite delicious afterwards. Not entirely sure how he was able to eventually stuff her body without it looking completely decrepit, but honestly, I don't think I really want to picture how it would look anyway. So far, we know that Mr. Chipper is a downright psychopath, who has little to no remorse for the deaths of any termites, is an impulsive arsonist, cannibal, and war criminal. Not to mention that later on in the game's sorta sequel, Chipper may have also sold all of his savings, including Tyke's college fund, his house, and the deed to the forest, to a casino owned by the Termite King, and probably also influenced Tyke to a life of gambling as a result. Halfway through playing the game, Chipper will eventually tell Tyke to explore until you come across a rare sight. This simply means finding an Easter egg. While a majority of them are usually just a character from the game popping in, or maybe a huge boat off in the distance, some of them are honestly kind of eerie. Sometimes in Tinker's Forest, the silhouette of a vintage woodbot can be spotted just simply looking around. Definitely a bit unnerving when you first get it. A more well-known one is the giant Lumberbot 5.0 that can sometimes be seen atop the water tower behind Chipper's house, and more disturbingly is Earl. When visiting the Frog's Pond, two frogs will regularly give Tyke items and occasionally talk about their good friend Earl. It's said that one day, while fishing, he toppled into the water and was never seen again. Although they both say that they swear they can still see him sometimes by the pond. Well, there's a chance that you can literally see his ghost leap from a lily pad and into the pond itself. I swear this game is so weird. There's also the Frog's Quest minigame, which is again fairly rare, strangely plays no music at all, looks strikingly different from the other minigames here, and has a very, very complicated way to beat it. One day I'll understand the Frog's Quest, but that day's not today. Another slightly less rare Easter egg comes from the Strange Traveler, who occasionally will pop in if the player stands still for too long. While I almost actually didn't include him here, thinking a bit more about his role in the game, he essentially kidnaps Tyke to transcend through time and space at hyper speeds for days on end, simply because he's, well, feeling a bit lonely. We're also told that he's taken this odd-looking physical form due to his mere existence being incomprehensible to the average beaver. So if I were Scott, his true form's probably some eldritch abomination or something. One thing I neglected to talk about concerning Chipper was the strange conversation he has with Tyke about his supposed secret son. He says that at one point, this son had become obsessed with the idea of recreating the land into a mechanical paradise. Sticking to his beliefs, his son started converting his body parts into wooden limbs. Until one day, the termites came and overtook him, using him for quote-unquote their own bidding. So Chipper decided to fully dismantle him, breaking him into 7 parts and hiding the parts in each of the 7 kingdoms. Did I mention this game was weird? I'll be real, I'm not really sure what this is meant to imply. This is literally the only time anyone talks about another one of Chipper's kids, which also notably contradicts Termite King's knowledge about his rival's offspring. So it's possible that Chipper might just be trying to tell another joke. Again, such a kidder.
Such a kidder.
But beside his comedy act, there's definitely something to be said about Chipper's past inventions. There's another Easter egg I didn't mention concerning the sad toy that sits by Tinker's Forest. This robot can surprisingly rarely say things both encoded in binary or sometimes not. A few messages he says though are quite concerning, with some of the more interesting ones being, "How I wish it were only my eyes alive in the dark, rather than thoughts alive in the darkness of mind," and "But I didn't mean to, I'm sorry." Due to this, some of the other Easter eggs and Tinkerer directly calling the forest that their shop is located in haunted, it's likely that these robots are sentient in some shape or form. Especially concerning when it's implied that none other than good old Mr. Chipper left these robots here in the first place. With all this robot talk, I'd like to address one last thing about Chipper. Pretty early on in the game, when Chipper starts talking to Tyke about making lumberbots, he recalls a time when an actual lumberbot, who he designed to be an exact duplicate of himself for some reason, tried to take over the place. But don't worry, he destroyed it with a shovel. Maybe. Besides just Chipper and the Termite King, a lot of other different characters in the game also help Tyke out on his journey. One of these being Fungal, which is the name of the giant mushroom who hangs below the bridge in Stork's Crossing with a few other characters. Despite his design, he's part of the very few characters that actually help Tyke out by offering him a minigame to play occasionally. The reason I bring him up is actually because many of the different characters in the game straight up hate this guy. Seabill, probably one of the more innocent characters in the game, probably refers to him as a shady mushroom, also implying he steals legs. Tyke on his date with him doesn't... Yeah, and it's implied that the reason the bridge always falls is because of him directly. He also said that he's collected 3 brains, watches people while they sleep, probably also eats those same people, and actually confirms that he in fact does steal legs. Seemingly not a very fun guy to hang out with. One piece of dialogue here, however, seems really interesting. pointed out in a Chipper character discussion post by a past moderator of the FNAF subreddit, Invaders, is that this same mushroom might actually be the secret son that Chipper was talking about. While interacting with him underneath the bridge, like usual, there's a chance he can say, "I used to make things out of wood too, then I woke up and I was a mushroom." While it's not given too much thought in the thread itself, we know that Fishy was stated to have been a fisherman before, and we do both see and hear about a lot of different beavers in the game, so it's definitely possible. Maybe this mushroom grew from one of the wooden limbs that was scattered about, and potentially tried to return home. I mean, I could definitely see him carrying a bit of his father's murderous tendency traits. Am I thinking too far into this? Yeah, definitely. As the player gets closer to finishing the game, Chipper starts to tell Tyke of an invention he's been holding on to that's been haunting him for a while, to the point where he's scared to even mutter its name, asking Tyke to eventually get to the point where he can both build this thing and then completely destroy it. The only thing we learn about this mysterious invention early on is that Chipper had poured all of his rage and sorrow into it. Funnily enough, kind of like Agony from the later FNAF series. Even the Termite King phrases it as an invention where Chipper had a brush with insanity. That's when you eventually build what's known as the Father Tree. I'm using eventually very literally, it's quite the grind. Think of the Father Tree as like the game's final boss, and is also the only build you can place that cannot be easily deleted afterwards. If not handled in time, Father Tree will eventually start placing down seeds around the surrounding land that can eventually replace other builds and trees with even more Father Trees. The only way to actually kill the Father Tree is by placing a robo-termite colony directly next to it, which will fully infest and kill Chipper's mad invention. So then, you might be thinking, why in the world did Chipper build this monstrosity in the first place? Well, he says that after his wife's death, he wanted to be able to control things. Let's add that to the list, thinking that this tree would in turn make everything better. Meaning that Chipper not only invented a machine that would eventually probably destroy the world, but he made his son build it. I don't know, at least he set Tyke up with a good date afterwards, right? All in all, Chipper & Sons Lumber Co., while I definitely wouldn't call it a horror game necessarily, has a lot of surprisingly unsettling elements. But I'd say above all, it definitely adds to the hilarity of the game, and I think that's why I love it so much. Besides the constant dad jokes, Chipper being a control freak mad scientist war criminal who accidentally ate his wife and might be plotting to end the world through the small bits of dialogue along a person's playthrough of this supposed children's game is so shocking that it's genuinely funny. Especially since Tyke doesn't say a single word about anything that happens to him throughout the entire game. Because if it were me, after about my 100th time falling off that stupid bridge, I'd have some choice words to say to that giant mushroom. While in the beginning, I had claimed that Chipper & Sons is mostly relegated to the scary-looking game that inspired FNAF, it's definitely much more than that. You can tell that Scott put a lot of passion into this game, with its own unique art style and humor that absolutely stood out from other 2013 mobile games. I'm really glad it's gotten a small resurgence in popularity after the release of later FNAF titles, even spawning officially licensed Chipper merchandise, including Termite King and Sea Bill, which is actually kind of crazy. Although I think we can all agree, Chipper needs to be locked up immediately. I'm like 99% sure he poses more of a threat to society than William Afton ever did. Did somebody turn off the lights?